Welcome to Social Influence, Lesson 8. Situational variables affecting obedience, including proximity, location, and uniform. My name is Nick Redshaw, and I have over 16 years experience of teaching A-level psychology. I'm also co-author of the highly successful Independent Learner series of student workbooks available on Amazon. Situational variables affecting obedience. Milgram, having concluded in his first study that different factors affected obedience, was interested in looking at the strength of these variables on obedience levels. He focused his research on the following situational variables: proximity, location, and uniform. Firstly, proximity. In the original study, it was concluded that the participants obeyed because they felt under pressure to continue when the experimenter was in the same room. In addition, the learner being in the separate room made it easier for the participant to administer the shocks. In the follow-up study, the experimenter left the room and gave instructions to the teacher over the phone, and obedience levels dropped to 20.5%. In another study, the learner was in the same room and gave obedience levels dropped from the original 65% to 40%. Location. In the original study, it was concluded that the prestigious settings of the Yale University laboratory accurately reflected the situational factors that someone would encounter in an authoritarian situation in real life. In a variation of the original study carried out in a run-down building, Milgram found that obedience fell to 47.5%, which, although still high, was significantly less than the original baseline study. Uniform. In the original study, the experimenter wore a grey lab coat, a symbol of authority or type of uniform. In a follow-up study, the researcher was a member of the public, wearing ordinary clothing, and obedience dropped to the lowest of all the obedience levels at 20%. In the exam, if you're asked to write an extended question on Milgram, you will need to be able to evaluate. So for AO3, for 6 marks, you'll need to give the strengths and limitations of the research. Strengths. Milgram's follow-up studies provided strong evidence for the original conclusions that situational factors influence obedience levels. High level of control over the situational variables means the study has high internal validity, i.e., by systematically altering one variable at a time whilst keeping all the other procedures and variables the same, he could measure the effect the altered variable had on the level of obedience, meaning that cause and effect could be established. Due to the high level of control, replication of the original and variation research has been possible all over the world, and the findings of these cross-cultural studies have been generally supportive of Milgram's findings. This demonstrates that the original research was not just limited to American males. High external validity, as the lab environment accurately reflects authoritarian situation in real life and is supported by field experiments looking at obedience. High internal validity, as the participants clearly showed signs of distress which should not have been apparent if they did not believe it was real. Milgram's findings help us understand the psychological process involved in real-life atrocities, such as those committed in the Second World War and more recent conflicts in Bosnia and Rwanda. It also highlights the importance of identifying ways of preventing people from showing misplaced obedience to authority. The limitations or weaknesses of Milgram's research. There are obvious ethical issues with Milgram's study, include deception, protection from harm, and right to withdraw. The participants, however, were fully debriefed. Orn and Holland, 1968, claimed the original study lacked experimental realism, as the participants didn't believe they were really giving electric shocks, and that demand characteristics of the experiment revealed the situation was not real. This would have resulted in participant reactivity. Orn and Holland also claimed that the original study lacks mundane realism, as the lab environment is not true to real life. Orn and Holland claimed that the variations research is even more contrived. For example, replacing the experimenter with a member of the public simply would not happen in real-life situations. Milgram's research only used American male participants, so may lack population validity, i.e. the findings cannot be generalized to the general population. Smith and Bond, 1998, acknowledged that Milgram's research has been replicated in many countries, increasing its population validity. However, most replications have taken place in developed Western cultures such as Spain or Australia. We'll now look at further support for the influence of situational variables on obedience have come from the following studies. Bickman, 1974, carried out a field experiment into the influence of legitimate authority. The aim: to investigate the role of authority and uniform on obedience. Procedures: there were 3 experimental conditions. In condition 1, the Confederate was dressed as a security guard. In condition 2, as a milkman. In a third condition, he wore a jacket and a tie. Participants were asked by the Confederates in the 3 conditions to either pick up a bag for someone or lend someone money at a parking meter. The results: Bickman found that participants were most likely to obey if the Confederate was dressed as a guard than if dressed as a normal civilian or milkman. Conclusions: this supports Milgram's earlier research that uniform is a situational factor that will increase obedience levels. In an interesting study, Hoffling et al. 1996 looked at obedience in a natural hospital setting. Nurses were ordered by unknown doctors to administer what could have been a dangerous dose of a fictional drug to their patients. In spite of official guidelines forbidding administration in such circumstances, Hoffling found that 21 out of the 22 nurses would have given the patient an overdose of medicine. These findings support Milgram's claim that people are more likely to demonstrate obedience to an authority figure. And that brings us to the end of this lesson.